Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Allison Greenwood Bajracharya. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on our capacity building grant pathway. We're thrilled to have you here as we talk through the components of this grant, designed specifically to help organizations align to our strategic priorities and focus areas, grow their capacity to be a key contributor to closing economic mobility gaps in Kansas City region. If you joined us last week at our overview webinar, or you're planning on joining for another webinar, we want to acknowledge that there will initially be some overlap in content as we seek to explain what we've been developing in our grant opportunities and where we are going moving forward. So I'm here today as our Chief Impact and Strategy Officer. Again, thrilled to be here with you. And with me are two wonderful colleagues, Dr. Yvonne Owens Ferguson, our Chief Research Learning and Evaluation Officer. Welcome, Yvonne. And Jenny Kelly, our Senior Impact Officer, who has been taking the lead on the design of the capacity building grants. Welcome, Jenny. We will start with a little bit of background for me. So I will ground you all in our grant-making relaunch, including an overview of how we developed our webinar, our vision, our priorities, and our focus areas. And I'll talk a little bit about our grant-making pathways. Then Dr. Yvonne will talk about our metrics and reporting. Jenny will get into more depth on our capacity building grants. And then we're going to open it up to questions, which I imagine there will be many. And so we're hopeful that all of you today will get your questions answered. If you don't, we have additional webinars and we'll present more opportunities as well. But thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us. So just to ground you on where we've been, over the last year, we spent quite a bit of time reflecting on where we've been in the past, the legacy of Mr. Ewing, Mary, and Kauffman, getting feedback from the community and looking at data to develop our vision. And so our strategic refresh is really the culmination of extensive research, community engagement, and your feedback. And our vision now is very clear. By 2035, we want to see a Kansas City where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their background. When we say Kansas City, we mean the 6-county region: Cass, Clay, Jackson, Johnson, Platte, and Wyandotte. This doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you have to be located here, but it does mean that you have to do work that actively does or could provide impact on these 6 counties. Now I'm going to talk through our priorities, which again, we didn't develop in isolation. Similar to our vision, we conducted a series of community conversations to gather feedback and to get insights from the people who know Kansas City best, many of you included. We aligned what we heard from the community with national and local research on strategies that are most effective as we close the wealth gap. We landed on these 3 priorities, which we launched last spring. The first, college access and completion, ensuring more students not only enroll in college, but also complete their degrees. The second, workforce and career development, connecting people with the skills and opportunities needed to succeed in today's job market. The third, entrepreneurship, supporting new and existing businesses that can drive economic growth and job creation. Our why, we determined that if we concentrate on these 3 priority areas and collaborate with key organizations that drive impact in these areas, we can meaningfully narrow and move to close the economic gaps that persist in our community, particularly for those living far below the median income in Kansas City region. The why behind our priorities is simple yet powerful. We are committed to closing gaps for the most underserved communities. Our how? The feedback we received was invaluable and has shaped every aspect of the strategic refresh. We heard loud and clear that people want more than just resources. They want a foundation that is engaged, responsive, and deeply connected to the community. After we launched our 3 priority areas last spring, we spent more time looking at the data and determining how can we establish focus areas that will provide more guardrails to our grant making. So we've launched the following 4 focus areas. First, essential competencies and skills, equipping individuals with the mindsets, behaviors, and skills needed to succeed in both school and career. So one example of many that could look like essential competencies and skills is, for example, we're interested in mentoring and coaching, particularly if it is integrated into the job or real-world learning experience. The second focus area, education and employer connection, strengthening ties between education providers and employers to ensure that our workforce is prepared and relevant. So for example, somebody could be developing innovative pathways from school to employment. The third, participation and belonging. We know it's not enough just to get people into school or into great jobs. We need to create an environment where everyone feels seen, valued, and able to contribute regardless of their background. So examples of this could include initiatives that focus not only on creating access, but supporting continued engagement and advancement in college, work, or business ownership. And finally, our fourth focus area is equitable access, making learning pathways affordable and capital accessible to all learners, workers, and entrepreneurs. An example of this, intermediary lenders focused on minority-owned businesses. Each of these four focus areas applies to our different grant types available, and they overlap with all three of our priority areas. I will next give a high-level overview of our grants, but this information is all available on our website with even more detail of some of the examples. I want to repeat that the examples are only intended to be examples, and the list is much more exhaustive, and we're eager to learn from you all about what ideas you have in these focus areas. So this is a very quick overview of our grant-making pathways. More information, again, is available on our website and will be detailed further in our additional webinars and office hours. But to make sure everybody is starting from a similar position, first, we have our capacity building grants, which obviously you've all learned a little bit about because you're here today. We're really excited to get in the details with you on this. These are intended for organizations that are focused on achieving economic mobility in Kansas City to build capacity. It's that simple. Of course, there's a lot more detail, but that is a high-level overview. The second is our collective impact grant. This is a two-part grant for coalitions of high-capacity organizations who are looking to create systems change aligned with our priority areas and focus areas, again, focused at systems level on closing economic mobility gaps in the Kansas City region. Both of these grants are now open. There will be collective impact webinars next week. There are two of them. One is at capacity, another one still has much more availability. Additionally, our sunset grants are now open, and these grants are for organizations that have received long-term funding from the foundation who no longer see themselves aligned with our priority areas and focus areas. You can apply for a sunset grant. Additionally, and coming soon, we have our project and research grant. Our project grants are for organizations to design, implement, or scale a multi-year project that drives impact across our strategic priorities. And our research grants, are to build a deeper understanding of our strategic priorities and focus areas and to address gaps in our research base and translate research findings into practice. Both project and research will be opening up via letters of interest starting October 15th. Finally, in January, we will share more information about our Kauffman Uncommon Leadership Award. This is an award designed to honor leaders of organizations building a legacy of impact in Kansas City. We'll have much more information coming about this in January. So that's our very quick high-level overview of where we've been, our strategic relaunch, or excuse me, our strategic refresh and our grant-making relaunch. I'm now excited to pass it over to Dr. Yvonne Ferguson to talk about metrics and reporting. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Allison. Throughout the strategic planning process, we leverage research and data to guide our decision-making around our strategic priorities and our focus areas, as Allison discussed. We selected priorities that are evidence-based drivers of economic mobility, and we selected focus areas that are evidence-based drivers of our strategic priorities. That said, we are launching this strategy knowing that we don't have all the answers. We must engage with community to build greater understanding of what closes economic mobility gaps. We are excited to collaborate with researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and community members to ask questions, test hypotheses, and really dig deeper into our focus areas to build collective understanding of what drives outcomes. Our approach to evaluation and grant making is in the spirit of collaborative learning. This slide mirrors the questions around metrics and the expectations around reporting. Next slide, please. This slide mirrors the questions around metrics and the expectations around reporting that are communicated in the application portal. So you will see that we have asked participants to tell us if they are collecting specific economic mobility metrics and to share additional metrics if they collect and track it. We are asking these questions not because we are asking you to report on these metrics, but to learn from and understand how organizations align with our strategic priorities track their impact. So if you do not collect these metrics, that is perfectly fine. Again, if you don't collect these metrics, that is perfectly fine. We ask these questions around metrics in the application in the spirit of collaborative learning. Next, you'll see on the slide our expectation around reporting. So for those capacity building grantees, we will be asking you to report on the development of the specific organizational capacity you were funded to build and how that capacity facilitates an increased ability to achieve your organizational goals, and finally, how you use the funds. So you'll be asked to share evidence of the increased capacity and evidence that that capacity has helped you improve your organization's ability to drive impact across our strategic priorities and our focus areas. So now I'm going to have Jenny share more detail about the capacity building grants. Jenny?
Well, thank you, Dr. Ferguson, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited to present more information about the capacity building grant pathway. We've really spent the last 2 months building and iterating on the grant purpose, application, rubric, and review process. We've also received and leveraged invaluable feedback from existing grantees on our language and our application process. So our capacity building grants were specifically designed to support aligned organizations in building organizational capacity. We recognize that many social impact organizations do not have the resources needed for a range of organizational capacity building activities that could really be game changers in increasing their organizational effectiveness. In service of our 10-year vision of closing economic mobility gaps in the Kansas City region, we believe that increasing the capacity of organizations that are aligned to our strategic priorities and focus areas increases our collective capacity to drive that economic mobility. Again, that doesn't mean you need to be located here, but it does mean that your work, the work that you're doing can positively impact the lives of Kansas Cityans either now or in the future. Therefore, we're looking for proposals that can show that the capacity they are building is high leveraged for their organizational impact. These should be one-time, short-term investments that build an explicit capacity. So our capacity building grants range from $100,000 to $250,000. Outside of our sunset grant category, the Kauffman Foundation does not give grants smaller than $100,000. The size of these grants are intentional. We want you to select and execute effectively on a high leverage capacity, one that will truly improve organizational effectiveness. Again, these are short-term, one-time grants, but we will not be dictating the term. There are some capacities that may take your organization only 6 to 8 months to build, such as strategic planning, for example. And there are capacities that might take over a year to build, such as building out or launching a new leadership team model. So you tell us. This timeline is available online, so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but I do want to highlight that we will open this grant twice annually. So if you aren't quite ready to apply now, you can apply in the spring of 2025. I also want to name that we are prepared to distribute capacity building grant funds as early as December 13th, 2024. And so we highly encourage you not to wait until the last minute to submit a grant proposal if you're looking for a 2024 disbursement. Additional opportunities for this grant type will become available both in the spring and fall of 2025. The application process for these capacity building grants starts on our website. You will find for every grant category an eligibility quiz made up of a few yes/no questions. This is designed to ensure you understand the minimum requirements for applying to this grant. Are you aligned to our vision, priorities, and focus areas? Please note that the criteria is not that you have to be based in Kansas City, but that your organization has the potential to drive impact in Kansas City. The application questions are available on our website as a PDF to download, and I highly recommend you view those questions as they will help you determine whether this grant makes sense for your organization. We've really worked hard in response to feedback to only put forward questions that really drive at the criteria we have developed. The application questions check for mission alignment, organizational history, and capacity to drive on our priority and focus areas, the potential of the identified organizational capacity to increase the goals they want to achieve, and ultimately the feasibility of your proposal. So what are some examples of capacity building initiatives we'd be open to funding? Again, there are many more ideas than what are listed on this slide, but we just wanted to provide a few examples to help spur your ideas. Again, we are looking for one-time short-term investments that drive organizational effectiveness. Building capacity for your organization could be a strategic plan, a community engagement process, the development of a talent retention strategy, leadership recruitment, selection, or onboarding, a landscape analysis that includes financial modeling of new potential revenue sources, planning and launching a new strategy, team, or capacity or capability in your organization. Or maybe your organization has grown to scale where the in-house data analysis and evaluation capability needs to be scaled to facilitate impact, and you want a grant to plan, build, and launch that new division in your organization. Again, there are dozens of examples, but we want you to identify a capacity that is high leverage for your organization. Now I'm going to turn it back to Allison.
Thanks, Jenny. Before we turn it over to questions, I just want to remind everyone that we have a number of upcoming webinars. None of these are required. We are just making them available for people to get as much information as needed so they can go into the grant application process as informed as possible. So we have collective impact webinars next week. We have our approach to grant making webinar at a high level on October 1st. Then we're going to have office hours, a number of points throughout September. We encourage everyone to register for these. We will open up a couple more webinars in October as well. I'm really focused on our project and research grants. So with that, I'm going to go through a couple of questions we've received. So first, the question was, can you clarify geography again? And I know Jenny mentioned this, but in case anyone didn't hear it, we are really focused on impact, either current or future, in Kansas City. That doesn't mean you need to exclusively be in Kansas City, but we want to understand the impact in Kansas City. For capacity building grants in particular, we are especially going to prioritize building capacity in Kansas City. And if you feel like you can draw the connections between your capacity in Kansas City and your opportunity to have impact in Kansas City, even better. The next one, and I'm just going to acknowledge that I have a number of different things I'm navigating at the same time here. So give me 1 second as I grapple with the multiple screens and the questions that are coming my way. Can capacity building funds used to hire someone? Can be used to hire someone. So I am a former Kauffman grantee, and I've spent a lot of my career running nonprofit organizations and schools, and know how hard it is to identify resources to hire people. So the answer to this one is nuanced. As Jenny mentioned, these are one-time grants. And so if there is a short-term hiring you need that can be used with these funds, then you can use that. We do not want you to apply for a capacity grant for a role that you don't have other revenue sources for or couldn't have other revenue sources for in the long term, unless it is a short-term role or you know clearly where other revenue sources will come longer term. Another question that's come our way is, can capacity building funds be used to lease more space or add on to my building? It would help build my organization. Serve more people. No, capacity building funds must go to a charitable purpose and therefore cannot go to general operating expenses such as leasing more space or contributing to an organization's capital building campaign. Jenny, are there questions that you've received in one-off emails that you might think might be worth getting in front of right now?
So I know one that's really been asked by more than a few people has been if people can apply for more than one pathway at the same time. And I think our kind of guidance on that is that we want you guys to be able to identify which grant you feel like would have the most impact for your organization. So we are asking for you only to apply for one pathway at this time, but realizing that some of our pathways do open at different times as well. So you might have the opportunity to kind of see where you fit best and then determine when it makes sense for you to apply.
Thanks, Jenny. Along those lines, there's a question of, can you apply for sunset and capacity building grant? So per Jenny's response, we only want people to apply for one grant. That being said, if you're not really sure if you're aligned with our focus areas and our priority areas, and you're truly not sure, you can apply for capacity. And if you don't fit, we will let you know and encourage you to apply for sunset if you meet the criteria for sunset. So we have intentionally timed the sunset grant. It is open now, but it is open all the way through March so that organizations can take time to consider, do they see themselves fitting with our priorities and focus areas or not? Another question I received is, define further, what does a one-time grant mean? Does that mean one grant per project or one grant per organization? And then the follow-on question is how long after receiving a capacity building grant can you apply to a different pathway? So Jenny, do you want to answer the first one? For one-time grant, does that mean one per project or one per organization?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we know that there are some organizations out there that have multiple different programs that they're running. So I think for those organizations, especially like university systems, we'd be looking for different programs could apply for different types of funding, even though they're under the umbrella of one organization. I think for specifically capacity building, we're really looking for grantees or projects that are going to be that one time. So when we say we're funding, let's say, for instance, a marketing, so you could build your marketing capacity, that would be the one-time funding you'd get for that marketing. And then once that grant was over, you, in theory, could come back and ask for capacity building grant for something else your organization might need. We just would not be looking to fund that same capacity building again in the future. Allison, anything you want to add there?
That was perfect. I wasn't testing you. You did a great job. The next one is, can you say more about the flexibility of the grant term? Can it be a multi-year term? Jenny, you want to take that?
Yeah, so we really, like we said in the webinar, we really want this to be kind of on your terms as the grantee. So we want you to just be realistic about how long you think it would take you to both spend the grant funds and build that capacity within your organization. So if that's something that needs over 1 year in length, that's totally fine. As part of the application process, you'll kind of tell us what you'd want your start and end date to be. And that end date will help determine, would it be a multi-year funding opportunity there. It doesn't mean you would get, like, again, that the max amount you can get for a capacity building grant is $250,000. So if you want to stretch that over 4 years, that's fine, but it doesn't mean you're going to get any additional funds on top of whatever you've requested, whether that's 100,000 or 250,000 or somewhere in between.
Thanks, Jenny. The next one I can take, it says, can an organization apply for both a capacity building grant and be part of a collective impact grant? For instance, collective impact area on shared measurement systems. So yeah, there's a nuanced answer here. If you are applying as part of the coalition of a collective impact grant, you can also apply for a capacity building grant. If you are the lead entity in a collective impact grant, you cannot also apply for a capacity building grant. Then there's another question is, will more points go towards capacity building goals that eventually help the Kauffman Foundation meet its goals? So just to be super clear, in order to be considered for a capacity building grant, you need to be aligned with our strategic priority areas and our focus areas, which ultimately means you're aligned with our vision of closing economic mobility gaps. So there will be a question, as Jenny mentioned, about how your capacity building is aligned with that. And Yvonne mentioned some of the metrics. They're very, very, very focused on capacity building with an option of adding additional metrics if they're aligned with some of the questions we're curious about. Yvonne or Jenny, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, just to reiterate about the metrics and what we're asking for. You'll see in the application portal around those metrics, and they are, as Allison mentioned, around economic mobility and closing those gaps. Please do not go out and collect these metrics if you do not already do that. We are not asking you to go and start collecting metrics that you don't already capture. Again, we are asking these in the spirit of collaborative learning on both sides. So again, don't go out, and you do not need metrics to be able to apply for the capacity building grants or any of the grant pathways that we have. Again, it's about learning from organizations that are already capturing these types of metrics, and from us learning from each other.
Thanks, Yvonne. All right, y'all, your questions keep rolling in. This is fantastic. So the next one is, could capacity funding be used to contract a consultant to build out a marketing or larger fund development strategy? Or does a complete website redesign, including translation of a website and all materials, print and videos into Spanish? So I love this answer because it's yes and yes. It could be either. So we're really looking to you to understand what capacity you need to build as you're driving towards greater impact in closing economic mobility gaps. And so if that's to hire a consultant to help develop a marketing or large fund development, terrific. Or if it's to develop website redesign and translate all of your materials into Spanish and any other language that's relevant, that's great. Okay, the next one is, what if we feel like we fit into multiple focus areas? That is also makes a lot of sense to me. So the focus areas are not intended to be exclusive. They are intended to provide guardrails given the priority areas are so broad. So if you've aligned with multiple focus areas, you can just indicate that in your application. Could this grant apply to nonprofits addressing healthcare equity issues facing underserved communities? So we'd really want to see alignment with our 3 priority areas. Again, access to and completion of college, workforce and career, and entrepreneurship. And then in addition to those priority areas, we'd want to see alignment with our focus areas. There's another question about the length of the grants. So as Jenny mentioned, the term of the grant is up to you. These are really intended to be shorter term grants, so 1 year in nature. But if ultimately you determine you need the funding for a multi-year project, you can indicate that in your grant. Whereas our collective impact and our project and research grants are very intentionally multi-year in nature.
So there's a question around the geographic requirement. And as Jenny and also Allison mentioned, our geographic area in terms of the 6 counties that were named, and we can put that in the chat if that is possible, just to reiterate that. I think it's already in the chat once, but we can put it in the chat again around that. And does an applicant have to be based in Kansas City to apply for the capacity building grants? I'll pass that to you, Allison, just to reiterate.
Sure. An applicant does not need to be based in Kansas City to apply or to be considered. We are going to prioritize those that are building capacity in our priority areas, but we will also accept and consider applicants that are outside of Kansas City as long as there's clearly impact or potential for impact in Kansas City. I see another question that came in. And again, if that is still unclear, please let us know by emailing us or attending office hours, and we can talk through that with more detail. For project-based grants, if an entity is new, does it need to be legally formed and or have a 501c3 approval before applying? So if an organization is new and they have a fiscal sponsorship, they can apply. There's also, I believe, some other questions about if you are not a nonprofit organization, can you be considered? And the answer is a little bit nuanced. We do program-related investments, and we do fund for-profit organizations that are aligned with their priority areas and focus areas, that are pursuing funding in a way that is, clearly aligned with our nonprofit grants as well. There are some additional processes that need to go through for consideration. We do not fund individuals. We do not fund scholarships directly. We do not fund organizations generally that discriminate. So there's some legalese on our eligibility criteria. If you're wondering, if you're like not exactly sure, the first step in our application process is an eligibility quiz, and you can take that to see if you can move forward or not. At the end of the day, all the applications have to be for charitable purposes.
Some questions that I'm seeing just pop up on my screen while you're going through, Allison. Jenny, you can help with that. What is the closing date for the capacity building grants? Jenny, can you answer that?
Yep. So our applications are now opened as of August 29th is when they opened, and they'll be open until October 8th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So be sure to get your application in before, October 9th hits.
Thank you. Okay, there's some questions around where does lobbying and policy making fit into these grants? So we cannot lobby and we cannot provide grants for lobbying. We can provide grant funding for policy and for advocacy, but again, they need to be related to our priority and focus areas. We do have some questions and some language on our frequently asked questions that provide more specifics about this because it is fairly nuanced language, but we cannot provide funding directly for lobbying. I think there's some questions still around, can we apply for multiple grants at once? So the default is you should only apply for one grant at once. The exception is if you're a large institution or if you are part of a coalition, but not the lead for the collective impact. Our cycles we've built pretty intentionally so that if you, again, apply for a capacity building grant, but ultimately don't qualify, and you could qualify for a sunset grant, we'll let you know. If you submit a letter of interest for a project or a research grant and you ultimately don't qualify, but we think you're better suited for a capacity grant, then there will be another capacity grant opportunity in the spring. So we've really tried to be very intentional about this, recognizing it's really hard when a foundation only has one window a year to provide grant making opportunities. It will be a little bit imperfect as we've made our best guesses. Until we really understand the number of applications we receive, there will be, some learning that we're doing. But we've put out there timelines for each application and our goal around when we'll start to distribute funding. But some of the funding may take longer to distribute just based on demand. Okay, there's a question regarding the sunset grant. When can you apply for another sunset grant? And also, what's the difference between a sunset grant and a capacity grant? So, Jenny, you want to take the second question first, and then I'll talk about timing. So what's the difference between a capacity grant and a sunset grant?
Yeah, so a sunset grant, these are going to be typically to recent grantees who no longer align with our strategic priority areas or focus areas. And so those are going to be organizations that don't see themselves receiving funding again in the future. So sunset grants really are kind of like their name. They're meant to sunset and help an organization kind of transition, give them time to find other funding that might have replaced Kauffman funding. The capacity building grants are for organizations who see themselves aligned with our 2035 vision and just need help building an organizational capacity.
Thanks, Jenny. Regarding the timing, if you ultimately apply for a sunset grant because you no longer see yourself as aligned with our priorities and focus areas, then we ask that you acknowledge that you will not apply for funding again until 2027 because you don't currently align with our priority and focus areas. I'm sorry, that you will no longer be considered for funding until 2027. So the nuance there is you could apply in 2026 for 2027 funding, but essentially you're opting out from a grant cycle for the next couple of years because of your because of the way your organization is focused in ways that are distinct from our current priorities and focus areas. Okay, Yvonne, I've got a question for you. is quote unquote real-time key performance indicator, KPI reporting allowed instead of matrix reporting?
Yes. So again, going back to what we are asking for and what we're looking for in terms of collaborative learning for capacity grants, the reporting is such where we just want to know, are you building capacity around what you said you will build capacity around? If that includes or involved in providing some metrics that align with what you what we have listed and or what you have in terms of your organization, then that is fine. We're not being restrictive on how we go about the framework that we use for metrics and for metrics. I do want to emphasize though that again, if you don't already collect those metrics, don't go out and collect them now. We are not looking for that. And also, I think it will be more of a question or depending on what type of grant pathway you're applying for. And the other webinars to come around the grant pathways that Allison and Jenny mentioned, for example, the collective impact planning grants and the project grants that will be having webinars around, that those reporting and those metrics would be different versus the capacity building grants. And so I would encourage organizations that are interested in applying for those grant pathways to also attend those webinars where more information around metrics and reporting for those specific grant pathways will be provided.
Thanks, Yvonne. Okay, I see two additional questions here. One is, do you fund organizations that provide capacity building for other organizations? Yes, absolutely. If organizations are providing capacity to other organizations aligned with our priority and focus areas, then we certainly do that. Similarly, if organizations are providing technical assistance to organizations aligned with their priority and focus areas, we do that. There's a question regarding overlap with Kauffman programs. So this is a very specific question. I'm going to read it so I make sure I get it right, but I'm sure it applies to many programs. If an entrepreneurship curriculum is different than FastTrac, is Kauffman prioritizing FastTrac when receiving entrepreneurship proposals it is reviewing? And can we apply for capacity if we receive funding from Greater Jobs KC? So let me take the second question first. So any organization is able to apply for grants through our portal, regardless of whether you received a grant 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or never before. So if you are aligned with our priority and focus areas as part of this relaunch, we are really opening it up to everyone who is aligned, regardless of what other entities you are getting funding from. So yes, you can apply. We are aware that there are lots of assets in our community and lots of assets outside of our community that could also impact Kansas City. So we are not looking for super specific curriculum. We're looking for opportunities to learn and grow and build impact in Kansas City through different programs, project, capacity building areas you're looking to grow in. So we're not going to be curriculum specific. We are going to be agnostic as long as it's aligned with our priority and focus areas. Okay, some questions regarding office hours. What do I need to do to prepare for office hours? So similar to webinars, office hours are optional. We really only want you to come if you have some burning questions. We know you are really busy, and so we're trying to figure out the best way to get as many people as possible, as much information as possible. So if you have burning questions, come to the office hours with those questions. If you don't have questions, but you feel like you should have questions, you can come to office hours and just listen. They're really intended to provide more information and learning for organizations that are applying, considering applying, debating what to apply for, etc. The intent is really just to get as much information out there as possible.
Can I add to that, Allison?
Uh-huh.
I would encourage organizations before coming to the office hours to make sure you go through our website and see our FAQs We know there's a lot of information. We presented a lot of information in this webinar and also in the webinar before that, but making sure that you are aware of all the information and understand the different grant pathways that would, I think, help you to prepare for the office hour to be more strategic and purposeful around the questions that you ask during that time.
Thanks, Yvonne.
And can I add something as well to
Yes.
that? I think the office hours too, they're not intended to like be an opportunity to provide specific feedback on someone's specific application, like showing up saying, here's what I'm going to put into your portal. What do you think of it? That's not really the intention of the office hours either. It's to broadly talk about what the opportunities are and then, kind of help answer any other questions that still might be remaining.
Thanks, Jenny and Yvonne. I think those are both important distinctions. Jenny, another question for you. Would program development including establishing strategic partnerships constitute capacity building?
I think yes, kind of what we're trying to do with capacity building is we're trying to make it as really broad as possible. So while we provided some examples in this webinar, it's not exclusive to those examples. So I think, being able to build partnerships, strategic partnerships, would definitely be something that could fall under that capacity building.
So another question is, can these funds be used to help build capacity, increase capital base for a revolving loan fund program for underserved entrepreneurs? Jenny, how do you feel about that question?
I feel like that's a very nuanced question that legal probably has an answer to, and I would hate to give out the wrong answer on a webinar.
I think that's probably right. Sorry, Jenny, for putting you on the spot. We have invested in funds focused on increasing loan capacity and thinking creatively about access to capital. That would typically align more with our project grants. If you are a for-profit, you would need to apply for a PRI through a project grant as opposed to a capacity building grant. And whoever submitted this question, if you want to follow up to our email, we can reach out directly with a more specific answer for you.
So Allison, there was another question that I
Great.
think I can jump in around. If you have a single capacity grant, can it cover multiple areas that you want to build capacity around your organization? And the simple answer is yes, it just has to make sense. So in your application, if you describe what specific areas you want to build capacity around and it makes sense, we're not limiting what you propose to one area. If in fact that dollar amount that is provided can cover multiple ways in which you can build capacity. And so I think we provided some examples, and again, they're just examples. We are not, we are open to hearing from you on areas you want to build capacity around.
There's a question around the size of the organization that is eligible. We haven't put out that specificity because we know there's lots of organizations ranging in size who need to build capacity. That being said, if a capacity building grant is going to double your organizational budget, then we probably want you to think about other ways to build your capacity before you qualify for a grant. So we want to make sure every organization that's applying is able to leverage the funds well and not suddenly feel overwhelmed by them, because that would be counterproductive as we think about impact. Jenny was very clear in saying the range is 100,000 to 250,000. That range is also intentional because we know that there's a large number of organizations that can benefit from that range for capacity. There are some organizations who would probably prefer a smaller grant size, and we're eager to invest in other organizations who can then make grants and help build capacity of the smaller organizations. So if this grant size feels too big for you, we definitely understand that and are eager to partner with some other organizations that can better support you because of their proximity to you. Okay, there's one additional question about sunset grants and the requirements around them. So I'm gonna review this again. So for sunset grant applicants, you do need to be a 501c3. You do need to have received funding from us for at least 3 of the last 5 years through our grant making process. And it's really important that you're reflecting and no longer seeing alignment with our priority and focus areas. If, in fact, the program you've received funding for no longer aligns, but you have another program that does, then we definitely encourage you to reflect on the other grant-making opportunities and pursue those. But if after your reflection, you no longer see any alignment at all, and we don't want you to, we definitely want to discourage and do not encourage people to do gymnastics or all sorts of tricks to see alignment. We want you to be able to stay mission focused on who you are and what you know how to do best. Then we encourage you to apply for a sunset grant, recognizing that by applying, you're also opting out of funding until 2027. All right, we'll hold for 1 more minute to see if there are other questions that come in. If I've missed some of your questions, I apologize about that. Let's see. Okay, so what is the difference between the project grant and capacity grant? Jenny, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, so capacity building again is really supposed to be a short-term, like one-time type of fund that would help you build capacity that once it's built, you kind of have a plan to sustain it following the end of the grant term. The project grants are going to be kind of like more, again, a project where it's probably a multi-year project. And I know the funding for those is a lot higher than the capacity building project, and it's multi-year funding. So really these capacity building ones, I think in some ways you could maybe see them as like almost like a pipeline to get to a project grant potentially. Again, I say that potentially because it's not guaranteed, but we're really trying to kind of like help an organization build a capacity in one specific area.
Great, thanks, Jenny. A question along those lines is the $250,000 limit per grant period or per lifetime with an individual organization? So the $250,000 limit is for this grant, for the grant term that you define. Again, we're sort of starting assuming a 1 year, but it may be longer just based on the capacity and the needs you have. Once your grant term has come to an end, then you are welcome to apply for additional funding. And as Jenny alluded to, we're eager to see many of the organizations that receive capacity building funding grow their capacity, so then they're well positioned to apply for project or research or collective impact funding. Here's another question. Can funding be used to plan an event that helps generate more funding? So we have a sponsorship opportunity available on our website if you're interested in funding for a specific event. If you are trying to build your fundraising capacity and you're interested in bringing on short-term contractor to help with grant writing or to do training for your team or to build out your website and increase your collateral or to work on your storytelling, those are all things that could qualify potentially for capacity building grant. If an organization is applying for the first time, are there age limits or other restrictions that might apply before a newly launched entity can receive funding? Again, you need to have your 501c3 status clear and or a fiscal sponsorship that's clear. Jenny, can you remind us of some of the questions we ask related to the capacity of an organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. We definitely ask about leadership of the organization, both in terms of, which I think can include, how long your leaders have been at your organization, or just more broadly what their background is in that industry or in our focus area and how it's aligned with what our 2035 vision is. And I think as far as, we'd also be looking at the amount requested and comparing it against like your anticipated like annual budget, just to make sure. I know Allison mentioned earlier, if your organizational budget is $250,000 a year and you're asking for $250,000, that might not be a good fit. But that would just be something else we'd be looking at across all grants, not even necessarily ones where it's a newer organization. But I don't, again, as long as you have your 501c3 status or that fiscal sponsor, I think even brand new organizations can apply, especially for this capacity building grant opportunity.
Thanks, Jenny. There's a question related to our indirect policy. It's clear on our website that it applies to our project and collective grants. Does it also apply to our capacity building grants? So it does not. For project and collective impact grants, you have pretty specific budgets aligned with the outcomes you're seeking to achieve. Capacity budget, it's pretty simple. You're telling us what capacity you're building, and how that may include staff time and whatnot. And so it is not relevant in this context. Let's see. There's one more question we want to get to, and then we can close out. Let's see. Oh, can an intermediary apply for capacity building for smaller organizations? So again, the intent of this grant is really to build capacity of the organizations that are applying. So if an intermediary needs to build capacity so that they're then better positioned to support other organizations, we encourage you to do that. If you're seeking to raise funding so that you can then provide grants to other organizations, the project grant is, or even potentially the collective impact grant is a better opportunity for that. Okay, I am going to pause there. Jenny and Yvonne, is there anything else you'd like to add? I'm laughing because my office did just go dark, so let's see if the light can turn back on.
Nothing more I see in terms of metrics on this end, in terms of in the chat. So I think I'm good on this end.
I think the only thing I would add is just a reminder that we have additional webinars as well. And I believe we're having at least two collective impact webinars, and I believe a project and research webinar coming up, if I'm not mistaken. So I know a lot of the questions might have been more positioned towards those type of grants. So would just encourage people to check back for those webinars and sign up for our additional ones that might have more specific information about those other types of grants.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you all for your questions. It is very likely that I missed a couple that came in, and if so, I apologize. But we will do our best to identify any that we didn't answer that are sort of thematic in nature to add them to our frequently asked questions online. Otherwise, we may follow up with you specifically if we need more clarity on the question. Encourage you to continue sending questions in. And as Jenny mentioned, please join our upcoming webinars or office hours. That's helpful. We're very, very grateful for your time. Thank you so much. Again, we know this is an especially busy time of year. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to ongoing conversations and collaboration ahead. Thank you, Jenny and Yvonne, for joining as well.